Hello, my friends, and welcome back to a brand new episode of Voices in the Game. It's been a little while, so we are so happy you all are joining us for an all new episode. And I am extremely excited for our episode today because if you have been a college basketball fan over the past few years, I think it's safe to say you might know who our guest is on today's episode. He has covered 35 Final Fours in his career. He is a college basketball columnist for the Sporting News and a studio analyst for the Big Ten Network and Fox Sports. He is Mr. Mike DeCourcy. Mike, thank you so much for coming on, my friend.
Oh, delighted to do it, Colton. Always happy to connect with a fellow pioneer.
Yes, indeed, Mike. Yeah, and that's perfect because Mike and I have two things in common. We both are Pittsburgh Yinzer natives, and we also are both graduates of Point Park University in Pittsburgh. Yeah, so I'm extremely excited to have you on, Mike. And that is actually the place where I would like to start for you, growing up in the Mon Valley neighborhood of Pittsburgh. So, where did you first get your inspiration into wanting to get into the sports industry? And was that always a goal for you to be a writer specializing in college basketball?
Well, I knew from the time I was in basically around fourth grade that what I wanted to do, that I wanted to be a sports journalist, I guess. As I went through from that initial idea, uh, I, I didn't really know 100% whether it'd be broadcasting, it'd be writing or whatever. Very early in my time at Point Park, someone, I think it was the late great Vin LaBarbera, who essentially founded the great communications and journalism department that now exists at Point Park, who suggested that someone talk to me about working in the sports information office. And they took me up and took me on a little tour, and I'm like, nah, that's not what that's. And I love the men and women who do that for a living. They make my job a lot easier most of the time, but it's not. It wasn't like I knew right away it wasn't what I wanted. So then that left open the other two doors of writing and broadcasting. And when I got out, the idea was that I went through Point Park trying to train myself to be able to do both wherever there was a job when I got out. And writing was the door that opened first. And I feel really blessed that eventually, I credit Seth Davis for this in a lot of ways. When he got hired by CBS, that kind of opened the door for some of the rest of us to also do analysis. And I got the chance to do that at Big Ten Network. So eventually I got to do both and feel really blessed that I've had the chance to be able to have kind of both careers at the same time.
And how were you able to fall into really specializing in college basketball, Mike, once you started your career after you graduated from Point Park?
Well, when I was younger, my brother was a player. My brother played varsity basketball at Elizabeth Forward High, and then he went on to play 3 years at LaRoche College, now LaRoche University, just like Point Park is Point Park University now. But he played 3 years at LaRoche, and I just fell in love with the sport watching him play. Watching the early on Notre Dame play with Austin Carr and later Adrian Dantley, watching those games on television. I just fell in love with the sport. And when I was a sophomore in high school, my high school biology teacher knew how much I loved it and asked if I wanted to go to see the Dapper Dan Roundball Classic. And that was like one of the great nights of my life, going to see the Dapper Dan. It was 76, and it wasn't even a great year. They didn't have, later on, I saw James Worthy play there and Isaiah Thomas, and I'm trying to think of who else. Sean Kemp played, and I saw so many phenomenal players at later Dapper Dans. That wasn't even a great year, 76. But I saw Sonny Lewis. I saw BB Flannery. BB's still around. I connected to him on Facebook now and then. And I got a chance to really fall in love at an even higher level for the sport. And from that point on until I left Pittsburgh, I never missed a Dapper Dan. I made sure I was able to go because that night was so special.
And for anybody who doesn't know, Mike, what is the Dapper Dan tournament?
The Dapper Dan Roundball Classic was the invention of Sonny Vaccaro, who later became a significant force in just about everything that goes on in basketball. Sonny just got done writing a book this year that I interviewed him for. Sonny came up with the idea to have Pennsylvania's best high school basketball players play the best from across the United States. And that it continued that way for about 15 years, and then ultimately changed it to just a high school all-star game, East versus West or whatever. And it stayed here, I think, in Pittsburgh until around 95 or 96, something like that. I'd been gone by then. And then he moved it to Detroit and Chicago, and then ultimately it ceased to exist. But from 65 when he started it until it ended, basically almost everybody that mattered in basketball went through the Dapper Dan. Magic didn't come; he was supposed to, but he didn't. Michael was not invited, which was one of Sonny's rare mistakes. But other than that, they pretty much had everybody who was everybody come through here.
Yeah, that's amazing, Mike. And going back to your start in the business, what was it like for you first breaking into the business? And where did you go with your first few stops after you graduated from Point Park?
Well, I started at the Tribune Review. They began an edition. Well, I got an internship. Tom McMillan, who became a huge figure with the Pittsburgh Penguins during their Stanley Cup years as a VP for communications, and was a terrific sports writer before he crossed over to that. Got the internship at the Tribune Review posted at Point Park, and because Tom's a Point Park alum as well. And so I answered the ad, went up and interviewed, got the internship, and then I worked my way from the internship into a full-time position. My first job was covering Major League Baseball, and I was really bad at it, and I didn't work hard enough, and I didn't totally understand the job. But the biggest thing I think was that when I look back on it, I was a little arrogant. But the main thing was I didn't work hard enough. And so at the end of that year, they decided to close the edition that they had initially started. They had to lay some people off. I was laid off. I deserved it. I know that I did. So when I then was doing some stringing on the side for the Pittsburgh Press to try to just to keep busy and get some clips and all that sort of thing. I took a job in Manchester, Connecticut. I was there for a day and knew it wasn't for me. I promised. I think I ended up staying 4 months, but I knew like within a day that I wasn't going to stay there. It was two people. It was a 2-person staff. It just felt like I wasn't going forward. And I went back to Pittsburgh and thought about getting out of the business, even though it had been my dream and I'd gotten that start. And then the Pittsburgh Press was going under a huge transformation, and there were people leaving, and the great Ernie DeFilippi called me one day. He had seen the stuff that I had done for the high school section, the stringing I was talking about, and said, "Come in, and I'll give you stuff to do." And from that day in July, like 2 weeks after I got back from Hartford, I was basically working almost every day at the press. And they were so short of staff, and I did enough good work that I actually made road trips. I covered a title fight, Boom Boom Mancini title fight at Madison Square Garden. I went to Boston to cover West Virginia against Boston College, and then jetted from there to Baltimore to do articles about Mike Ditka and Jimbo Covert, Beaver County guys who were with the Chicago Bears. And so all this stuff started happening, and eventually I did a good enough job with all that Ernie and Russ Brown, who had become sports editor, offered me a full-time position. So from July until like late October, so what's that, 3 months, I worked myself into that position. And that's how it got started for me. And at that point, I had learned that I needed to work hard. I had failed because I didn't work hard enough. And so that I never made that mistake again.
What was your motivation, Mike, to keep going when you did move back to Connecticut? Really betted on yourself when you did move back here to Pittsburgh.
Well, I mean, the motivation was like at the time I thought I was just going to go to grad school and see what I could figure out. And the motivation was that the door opened, that the door at the Pittsburgh Press opened. It was I was very fortunate, but this time I wasn't going to blow it. The door opened. I was going to give them everything they could ask for and do the best work I could possibly do, and they were happy with the work, and so they allowed the door to close behind me, so to speak. And from then on, for the next 9 years, I did everything I could to. And I'm not saying I ever made any mistakes during that period. I made plenty. But the mistake was never that I wasn't working hard enough or wasn't invested enough in success.
And you, like we talked about in the intro, you also do some work on television as well, including now, with the Sports Showdown show that you do on KDK with fellow Point Park alumnus, Mr. Bob Pompiani, and also your Friday football podcast with Tim Benz, who we have also had on this podcast. And when did you first start making all of those guest appearances, Mike, on television as an analyst?
Well, I really probably started in radio, Colton, with me guesting on different people's radio shows. For a long time, especially in March, I was one of the busiest talk radio guests in the country. I still do a lot of it, not as much. But I mean, if you'd saw back when we didn't have iPhones and we had like day planners, you should have seen my day planner in March. I mean, it was like, okay, Albany, Cincinnati, Kansas City, Pittsburgh. It was just like one after the other. And so that was getting me reps doing broadcasting. As I mentioned before, when Seth got hired by CBS as an analyst, I was totally bummed out. Not because I don't like Seth or I didn't think he'd do a good job, but I thought, how did I miss that? Like, was that window was open, that door was open, and I didn't see it. I didn't have, and I know I knew I could do it. And I'm not saying I could have done it better than Seth, but I knew I could do it. So I went to Seth and asked him how he got it done, and he said he had an agent. So he introduced me to his agent. This is a funny story. He introduced me to his agent, and his agent was very pleasant. And I said, would you take me on as a client? And he said, no, because I have Seth. And I said, you can't tell me you don't have two play-by-play guys or like three different football players who are calling games because you wouldn't have a career. I know you do. And he said, yeah, but I can't do it. So he wouldn't take me. But my friend Fran Fraschilla, his agent at the time, he gave me his number, and we met when I was in New York to cover a game, and we met for coffee, and he agreed to take me on, and started with these what were called then the March Madness coaches shows, and they would fly in a bunch of different coaches to talk that didn't make the NCAA tournament to talk about the NCAA tournament through after selection, after the establishment of the Sweet 16, and then after the establishment of the Final Four, and they do three shows. And early on they were getting big names, and then later on they didn't want to be bothered, or they were recruiting or whatever, and so they brought me in, and I did 3 years of that, and I was with really terrific analysts, Don McLean, Marcus Johnson, really Miles Simon did it 1 year with us. And so that work maybe helped me when eventually my agent talked to the Big Ten Network about me. And again, what they brought me into the Big Ten Network to do like regional reports. I used to drive from Cincinnati, where I was living at the time, to Columbus to do these like they weren't Zoom because they had studio, but I was coming in from there, and I did 3 or 4 or 5 of those. I don't remember exactly how many. And then eventually I did well enough that they said, let's bring him into the studio. And I've been there now. This will be my 17th season with them.
Yeah, that's amazing, Mike. And what did you do in Cincinnati, and how did the opportunity come about for you to join the Sporting News as well?
Well, after the Pittsburgh Press, I mentioned that I worked with for 9 years, and I would have worked there probably for the rest of my career if I could have. Went out of business at the end of 1992. I got the opportunity to go to Memphis. It was a terrible time to be an out-of-work sports writer, but a man named Lionel Linder had an idea when we were all going out of work. Some people went to the Post-Gazette because they basically bought the press, but They had never published a Sunday paper, so they needed some more people, but they didn't need me, I guess. And so Lionel Linder, who was the editor of the Memphis Commercial Appeal, thought uh, went to Scripps Howard, who was the owner of the press, and said, "Can I have some of those people?" And they said, "Okay, you can hire 6 people." And he offered 6 people jobs, and I was the only one that said yes. Lionel, actually, the tragedy of this is I never got to meet him. Uh, I was supposed to go down there on January 2nd for my interview, so that we made sure that we liked each other, the paper and me. And Lionel was killed by a drunk driver on New Year's Eve on the way home from the office. And so I never got to meet him, but he saved my career. I've always tried to honor him. I mentioned him in my Hall of Fame speech when I got into the USBWA Hall of Fame. I mentioned him in that. His family I've been in contact with when I've mentioned him, because I want his, what he did for me to never really go away. Everything I've done in the last, 32, 33 years is all a tribute to him, because if he hadn't had that idea and put himself on the line for that, I would have never gotten to, I would have probably had to leave the business. I don't know when I would have gotten back.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, oh my goodness, Mike. Yeah, yeah. How is that like, still keeping in contact with his family to this day?
Well, I haven't been in touch with him for a little while, but as I mentioned before, I've on occasion on New Year's Eve, I've written tributes to him on Facebook, that sort of thing, because what he did to me, for me, meant so much, and his family did express their appreciation that I would remember him in that way, and I wish there was more I could do in a lot of ways, because I talk all the time about how Memphis saved my career. When I went to Memphis, Colton, Pittsburgh is my home, and I got the chance to cover excellent players like Bobby Martin and Sean Miller, Jason Matthews, Darrell Porter, Brian Shorter when I was covering Pitt. But this was never, and still isn't really, a basketball town. And when I went to Memphis, like, that's a basketball town. It was a huge college basketball town. It's a little bit less so now because they also have the Grizzlies, but it's still a place that really is invested in basketball. And they were much more they were much more interested in what I could tell them. I knew the game when I went there. I learned it more as I was there and in the years since, but I knew the game when I went there, and they were very interested as an audience in what I could tell them about what I knew and what I could learn. It was a little less so in Pittsburgh. They wanted more basics, that's fine because that was the audience, and so that helped me eventually get to the Sporting News as a part-time. Basically, at that point, at very few full-time writers, and most of what they printed in the magazine was from freelancers, and I was a freelance columnist for the Sporting News, covering college basketball from 95 to 2000, and then they hired me full time.
And once everybody starts putting all of their winter decorations away towards the end of February, that is when you are pretty much the busiest man in all of sports with your bracket predictions. So what are the main things that you look for in every team for every season when you do make your bracket predictions, when it really goes to one of the most beautiful times of the year with March Madness?
Well, you have to have an idea. My assignment when I got it from Fox, when I got the job in 2019, they said your goal is to try to be as close to what the committee says as possible, because you could do that a lot of different ways. You could do what you think should be done, or a hybrid of that. But they want me to try to do the best I can to duplicate what they would do. And so that's my job. And it's not what you think might happen. Okay, so we're on February 1st and they've got 8 games left. I think they'll go. No, it's what it would be using the principles today if today were Selection Sunday. Because like I said, there's a lot of different ways you could do it. So that's my assignment. use their principles, try to duplicate what they would do, and do it as of whatever day you're projecting. And so that's what I try to do. The principles are often misconstrued, not by others who do this, but by the public. Uh, and even some analysts who don't do brackets sometimes misconstrue what's important. And so every now and then, Fox will have me in, or Big Ten Network will have me talk to the various people that are covering games and saying, okay, here's what this team has done. Here's where their resume is weak. Here's what they have to do down the stretch to feel comfortable about either getting in or getting a 1 seed or whatever the parameters for that team might be. And so that's kind of what I have to do. The committee's basically trying to not, they say they're picking the 64 best teams or the 68 best teams, but what they're really doing is going by who has the best resumes. That's what they're trying to do. And so that's what I'm trying to figure out is, what are they seeing? What are they thinking? I have done pretty well. If you look at there's a thing called the bracket matrix that ranks everybody who does this. Like if you're somebody that just has a website that you just do it for fun and you put up a bracket on selection Sunday afternoon, they will rank you. And you could be doing it for Fox Sports or ESPN or CBS or whoever, and they will rank you. And I've done pretty well in those. I'm not perfect. I'm not the best at, I'm not the number one or whatever, but I do well enough with trying to figure out what the committee's going to think that I think you can trust my analysis.
Do you remember the season where you had your best bracket out of all the years you've covered the sport?
Well, I mean, this past season, I finished 11th one year, and that was probably, I think that was in 2023. 2023, or maybe it's either 2022 or 2023. I finished 11th out of 200 or so. And this year I finished 12th. But my bracket in 2022 had 67 out of 68. This year I only had 66 out of 68. But I really nailed the bottom of the bracket. I think I got every seed line, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12. I think I was dead on every one of those lines, and I think that's where the real strength of my bracket was this year. I missed two because I just couldn't. I had North Carolina in. I didn't because I thought they would do it. I thought they were trying to find a way to justify it, and then I was working on it Saturday night heading into Selection Sunday, and I thought they can't justify this. There's no way. So I took them out, put Texas in. It didn't end up mattering because the West Virginia was one of the teams that all of us had in. Like if you did the average of all the projectors, West Virginia would have been clearly in, and Carolina, I think it would have been out. So a lot, very few got 67 or 68 this time because of the fact that they really adjusted their priorities, so to speak, to get Carolina in.
And like we talked about also in the intro, you have been to 35 Final Fours in your career. So how does that feel for you, Mike, knowing that you have been one of those core media members that has had the chance to watch the Final Four and the national championship game firsthand every season and also work it?
It's funny, Colton. It feels odd because, in some ways, because I go to the Final Four now and I see a lot of familiar faces, but they're all much younger than me. It's the truth. I mean, I see Pat Forty, who's just a few years younger than me, from Sports Illustrated. We are often seated not that far from each other on press row because we've been doing it for a long time. But a lot of the people that used to be there every year aren't there any longer. And some of that is that they've retired. Some of that is the nature of the business. Papers that used to send their basketball writer to the Final Four every year don't do that any longer. A few do, but not as many, and not as many familiar faces as I used to see. But the games are still great. The Final Four is still an extraordinary event. There are certain cities where it's better than others, and I'm looking forward to this one, the 2026 Final Four, because it's in Indianapolis. I lived in Indy for 10 years. There was one Final Four in Indy the 10 years I was there, which I was glad about because when you have a home Final Four, you don't really see your wife all that much more than you do when you're on the road. Like she doesn't come with me, so like I see her like 3 minutes more a day when I went in that home Final Four than I do normally. But you just don't feel like you're there. You get in the car every night and you go home, and Indy's the best place for the Final Four because everything is right there. All the hotels, pretty much, the arena where they do some of the side events, the stadium now, Lucas Oil Stadium. Is very walkable. It's a little bit more of a hike than the RCA Dome used to be from the hotel, but still very walkable. It's the best place to have the Final Four. It's the other thing that makes it great is unlike a lot of the cities that we've been to, Dallas, uh, San Antonio, which are fine places, they're just not really into it. Like they'll put on a nice event. It's a Final Four. It's a yeah, but they're like if you picked up the Dallas Morning News on the day of the Final Four, you might see a Cowboy story on the front four. Like it's not a hoop city. No matter like when the Mavs are good, probably they do that, but like it's not a hoop city. It's a all sports city, and Cowboys are everything. Indy is a basketball city. Like the Pacers, they went to the finals this year. The Fever got to the conference finals. Big IU, big Purdue, big Butler. It's just a great city for basketball, in addition to the fact that everything's located right there.
And finally, one question for you, Mike. How has college basketball changed over the past few years with everything that college sports has gone through? Of course, let's see, you got the transfer portal, NIL, and just everything in between. And also with the possibility of the tournament expanding to more teams in the future.
Yeah, see, I honestly think that if you asked me to make any of those go away, the one that I would go away in a heck of a hurry would be the expansion of the NCAA tournament. It is the most it is the biggest mistake, with the exception of Major League Soccer talking about the idea of playing September or August to May rather than February to November. Basically taking the core of their season out of the summer and putting it into the winter. Like that is just ridiculous. But expanding a tournament that everyone loves, that no one wants to pay for, so that you can get more 17 and 15 Big 12 teams into the field doesn't make any sense at all. It's a terrible idea. CBS doesn't want to pay for it. Turner doesn't want to pay for it. So they're trying to figure out, well, how do we do this? The only reason to expand is if you can get more money out of it, but there is no more money because the audience isn't there for those games. The audience is there Thursday at noon, and then the 64 start from there because that's most people's bracket contests start with that. There's some that use the first couple of rounds. But again, like if right now you can use that and it's not that hard to get through, but you've got to, you expand that to another 8 teams. And how are you making it better? You're not making it, you're not making the tournament better. So what are you making better? You're making it a little bit easier for teams that aren't great to get in. That doesn't make any sense at all. Now, when I talk about this, Colton, a lot of people think that I'm worried about the tournament. I'm not, because what will happen is that they'll play all those games on Tuesday and Wednesday if they do this, and they'll just as few people will watch them as before. And then on Thursday at noon, everybody will turn on. But there is the possibility of the erosion of the bracket of the people who are there because of the bracket and the bracket contests. Because if you add all those extra games, it might make it more complicated, less interesting. Right now, it's not that hard for people who aren't super into hoops, but turn in on, like I said, Thursday at noon. And the real problem is that the suspense that goes into getting there, well, where's that going to go? Like, you think people will be sweating the 76th team? And maybe if it's your team, but heck, we just had a year in which Indiana was this close to getting in and could have gotten in. I think that final bracket projection that I made did have them in, if I remember correctly. But they could have gotten in. But they were so disappointed at Indiana with their team that their coach resigned with 3 weeks left in the season. So it didn't make their season any more or less fulfilled getting in or not getting in. They weren't happy with their season either way. So it's not going to make it better. It's going to make the last few weeks of the college basketball season less interesting. And a lot of people who have really loud voices in American sports media who just want college basketball off their plate until March, call it a 1-month sport. I've heard it from multiple major broadcast voices. 1-month sport. It's not, and I know it's not, and the people who love it know it's not. But you're gonna allow more people to bleed into that thinking when, hey, if you can play at all, you can get in. I mean, like I always say, if you can bounce the ball 3 times without bouncing it off your foot, you're getting in a 7-16 tournament. Whereas right now, everybody that gets in, with the exception of the occasional North Carolina 2025, is very good.
And how do you think it's changed more, Mike, excuse me, with NIL and the transfer portal as well?
Yeah, I think the transfer portal has made it a little bit more transactional than you'd like. NIL has brought it up to what it should be. Players should always have had the opportunity to be compensated for their likeness. That's always been wrong. The way it's morphed into you being paid more for your ability than for your marketability, I'm not sure that's exactly what was intended, but because they never got a grip on this concept 10, 12, 15 years ago and just tried to keep pushing it off, it morphed into what it did. And at this point, I don't have a problem with it. I wish players were more committed to their situation, and I wish a lot of them understood they were better off where they are / were than they will be in their new environment, where they moved maybe to make another couple $100,000. That's one of the things. I wrote a big piece about Braden Smith, preseason All-American at Purdue, who had huge offers to leave Purdue as a senior, and I'm sure he's fairly well compensated at Purdue, but he realized in the end, I'm going to make more money staying here, being coached by this guy, playing with these guys as teammates, being respected and appreciated by those Boilers fans than I would anywhere else.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Mike, thank you so much for coming on, my friend. I had such a great time catching up and getting to learn more about your story. Thank you so much for coming on, Mike.
Thanks, Colton. I appreciate your interest in me.